Welcome to another episode of our video series of the Critique of Modern Systems.
Hello. It's good to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm ready to get into, I think, what is the core reason so many of us feel like we're just stuck in quicksand right now?
That's a perfect way to put it, and that's exactly what our material today demands. We've been looking at the sheer volume of notes on burnout, paralysis, procrastination, and it all points to this massive universal problem. The established frameworks for organizing your life, they're simply collapsing.
They are. It's not a personal failure. It's a systemic crisis of structure.
So our mission today really is to analyze why. Why are those structures failing and leading to this overwhelming chaos? And then we can explore the framework of Agile Living.
Exactly. We need to understand how this highly adaptive approach, which started in the fast-moving tech world, has now become an essential operating manual for the modern individual.
Okay, so let's start with what you call the crisis of parameters.
Yes. For centuries, society operated within these fairly clear boundaries, most of which were cemented during the industrial age. Your life track was, well, it was largely predictable.
Right. You knew the path, you'd graduate, you'd get a job at some big company, you stay there for 40 years, and then you retire. The social engineers could literally plan for 50 or 100 years out.
Because the environment changed so slowly.
Yeah.
That is completely a relic of the past now. The speed of digital transformation, which was then, supercharged by global disruptions like the pandemic or AI.
Light speed.
It's rendered those old, rigid boxes obsolete at light speed. The parameters they've dissolved.
And the biggest consequence of that is the total collapse of forecasting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Whether you're a Fortune 500 CEO or, just a new graduate trying to plan your next 5 years, you can't see past the immediate horizon. There are too many blind spots.
Exactly. A major global crisis, a huge technological leap like generative AI.
Yeah.
These things fundamentally change the entire shape of the market overnight.
It's like trying to predict the path of a river when a mountain could just appear in the middle of it.
It is. Which means we are all now forced into a mandatory phase of discovery. Since that kind of long-term strategic planning is impossible, the only way forward is this continuous short-term adaptation. That's what forces us into an agile mindset.
So this brings us to procrastination, which most people just see as a character flaw, right? Laziness.
And that's the counterintuitive part. When you find yourself avoiding those important tasks, your mind isn't being lazy. It's actually operating a very profound defense mechanism.
Okay, hold on. If it's a defense mechanism, why does it feel so terrible? I mean, when I procrastinate, I feel guilt, anxiety, just dread. The protection feels worse than the threat.
That's the friction point. That is the key. The mechanism evolved to help us survive when demands were, predictable and finite. But today, the sheer volume of burdens, demands, expectations, it's astronomical.
Right.
Your internal system literally hits the emergency brake.
It postpones action.
It postpones action because it cannot cope with everything at once. It is literally trying to protect your mental health from complete overload.
So it's your brain saying, nope, I refuse to engage with that mountain of complexity right now for survival.
Precisely. And that's why millions of us procrastinate. We're universally overwhelmed. But, and this is a big caveat, when you overuse that defense mechanism, it turns into a poison.
It's like using an anesthetic over and over.
Exactly. It creates a vicious cycle of waste and this deep, debilitating guilt, that feeling of constantly spinning your wheels while avoiding the very work that could move you forward.
And that's where you see the symptoms of this modern chaos. You can't focus, your concentration is shot, you feel perpetually overwhelmed, and you either fail to execute your plans or you can't even make them in the first place.
The planning itself feels too burdensome. It's a total system shutdown.
So we need a new tool. Where did it come from?
Well, it came from where the pressure was highest first, the software sector. They were at the tip of the drill, facing this insane evolution in data and user demands.
They realized pretty quickly that planning a huge product for 2 years was a death sentence.
Right, because by the time they launched, the market would have completely shifted. The old idea that change was the exception just vanished. Change became the norm.
So they needed a system that assumed continuous change was just baked in, and that's Agile.
That's the essence of Agile management, yes.
Yeah.
The core shift is moving away from these detailed long-term blueprints, the waterfall approach, to flexible short-term plans. We call them sprints.
And instead of aiming for some perfect finished product years away,
the focus is on delivering value quickly. often in these small increments of just a week or two.
Which fundamentally changes the goal. The goal isn't the finished thing. The goal is continuous adaptation, learning from the market right now.
It brings in this powerful biological analogy. Evolution, not static design. You don't try to create the perfect finished product right away. You create the most basic, necessary, functional version, version 1, and you let it live.
And it develops through observation, feedback.
And mutations. Necessary adjustments. It evolves into version 2, then version 3. A project has to be a living process, not a static monument you build and then just leave there for years.
Okay, so that need for rapid evolutionary change, it's now filtered down from big companies to the individual.
That's Agile Living. Exactly. New graduates, seasoned professionals, frankly, everyone has to reformat their internal systems to succeed in this environment.
So this means we have to stop chasing these rigid prototypes, the idea of the charismatic leader or some other standardized archetype of success.
Yes, you have to build your own consistent, steady system and formula, one that works for your specific situation.
And this is where you bring in the metaphor of the fog.
I find this helps people understand it immediately.
Yeah.
Imagine you're walking through life, but there's a dense gray wall, a fog, right in front of your face. You can only see maybe 5 or 10 centimeters ahead.
You're constantly at risk of collision, career mistakes, wasted years, failed projects.
Because your view is completely blocked by all this complexity. So the very first, the most crucial effect of implementing Agile Living isn't even productivity. It's starting to see.
It's opening that view.
It's clearing the fog just enough so you can see your internal systems, your environment, and your immediate next steps.
And to understand those internal systems, you use the model of the CEO and the workforce.
Yes. Think of your conscious executive mind as the CEO, and your inner self, your intuition, your energy levels, your subconscious, that is the thousands of workers who actually do the labor.
And if that CEO acts like a maniac, making huge demands, forcing 14-hour days, ignoring all the internal feedback like exhaustion or that gut feeling.
The workers revolt. And that revolt is critical to understand. It manifests as depression, severe anxiety, chronic physical pain, psychological shutdown.
So Agile Living is about restructuring the governance.
It's about getting the CEO, your conscious mind, to finally start listening to the reports and signals coming from the workforce. The CEO has to build internal trust.
And this leads us to what I think is a critical point. The difference between awareness and action. We hear so much about awareness, but you argue that just being aware can actually be poisonous.
It is so often the path to regret. If you gain awareness, you see the toxic job, the destructive habit, you know the source of your misery, but you remain paralyzed and take no action, that knowledge becomes an incredibly heavy burden.
Because now you know the problem and you're still failing to execute.
Which creates a much deeper guilt than simple ignorance ever could. Awareness without action is a form of self-sabotage.
This sounds like the problem of the 100,000 threads.
Exactly. A generation ago, the challenge was finding the thread. The one opportunity, the right mentor, the key piece of information.
Now you've got 100,000 threads opportunities, articles, advice thrust at you every single day.
And 99,000 of them are either unsuitable for you, misinformation, or just lead nowhere. The challenge isn't finding knowledge anymore. It's choosing the single right path for you and ignoring the overwhelming noise.
So, looping back to the CDO model, once the CEO starts hearing the internal voices and identifies the right thread to pull,
they must act on it and achieve tangible results, even small ones.
Because that action is the only thing that builds trust internally.
It is. If the CEO says, I hear you, you're exhausted, and then immediately acts by cutting the workday or delegating a task, the internal workforce, your intuition, your energy, they're going to communicate deeper, more creative insights next time.
But if the CEO just nods and then demands more work anyway,
communication shuts down. That trust cycle is the absolute engine of Agile Living.
What I find so powerful about this is the speed. This isn't some long philosophical program. You see average people getting real results, changing their environment, reducing that paralysis in just a matter of weeks.
It's about giving an overwhelmed person a framework to just start moving. They stop deferring the big things and instead focus on creating a small, valuable version 1 of their goals right now.
So, to summarize the transformation here, Agile Living is a mechanism that moves you out of that quicksand of constant paralysis and guilt.
It gives you the tools to listen to your internal system, to clear the fog of modern complexity, and to actively build your own road through a future you can't predict.
It's the ability to maintain your own evolving model consistently in a world where everyone else is still waiting for a static blueprint that is never going to arrive.
That's it perfectly.
So let's leave our listeners with this.
Oh,
We've established that the rigid industrial age boxes have failed us. If the future requires all of us to constantly create new boxes, new systems for our lives and our work, what is the single element we must prioritize protecting within those new structures so that we don't just end up rebuilding the same constraints for the next generation?
I think we have to protect the institutionalization of adaptability itself. If we can ensure that every system we build, from a personal project plan to a corporate structure, has a built-in mechanism for continuous evolution and for listening to individual feedback, we ensure we won't replicate the suffocating, rigid perfectionism that got us into this crisis in the first place.
That's definitely something to ponder as you start building your own version 1 this week.
Indeed.